21 years to get approved. We have it down to 2 years, and it's going to be 1 year very shortly. U.S. Steel is opening up 7 plants. I'll tell you what, Russia's very unhappy that Trump won, that I can tell you. I raised $44 billion last year, and you know, I don't know if you know, NATO funding was going down. Chain migration. And this was the Schumer deal. Schumer wanted this. Republicans just passed the biggest tax cuts in the history of our country.
Okay, so every one of those statements was false, like provably false, demonstrably false, and some of them were like outright, obvious, screaming, raging lies. And there are, of course, many more such lies where that came from just in the speech last night. Now, lying and getting away with it has kind of been Trump's thing, his kind of leitmotif of his entire campaign and his political life. But people are starting to ask whether we've entered into an entirely new era of Trump lies. In other words, are we now in full-fledged gaslight territory? Here's how Susan Glasser talked about Trump's lies in The New Yorker. The fact that Trump, while historically unpopular with the American public as a whole, has retained the loyalty of more than 80% of Republicans, the group at which his lies seem to be aimed, means we are in for much more as a midterm election approaches that may determine whether Trump is impeached by a newly Democratic Congress. At this point, the falsehoods are as much a part of Trump's political identity as his floppy orange hair and the Make America Great slogan. Phil, Rev, Jess, John, you're all still here. I want to focus in a second on a very specific lie, but just to the table here. Is it getting worse? It feels like it's getting worse to me, and more gratuitous and more disgusting. But maybe I'm just some kind of a, what do they call them, snowflakes?
It's actually statistically getting worse. At the Washington Post, we have a fact checker that keeps track of all of the falsehoods, the claims, the misstatements from Trump, and he just passed the 4,000 mark this month.
That's 4,000
right? In his presidency, but the pace is increasing. Right. So the last 2 months, he's raised about 1,000, I believe. And that's exponentially faster pace than earlier in his presidency, which indicates he's much looser with the facts now and much more willing to tell a lie.
It's possible that Moore's Law, which used to apply only to microchips, now applies to Trump's lies. Rev?
I think the danger of it is our normalizing presidential lying to where we become accustomed to it. And, you know, there was the standard when I was going to school, everyone thought George Washington never told a lie. We've gone from that to just counting and needing to have data collectors, because there's so many, of how many lies the president told. That is not a forward movement for the country's culture.
Where it gets truly insidious is when it's combined with the attacks on the press. If the president says, under normal circumstances, should a president say an untruth, we could disagree about it and then point to an objective source of fact, like NBC, like the New York Times, to talk about what is actually going on here. With combining his lying with his undermining of the press means that you're losing the objective source of fact for this 80% of Republicans that still tend to believe him. There's no way to reach them at this point. If he says something is true, there is no way for me on the other side of the aisle to have a conversation with my Republican family members and say, look, here's where it says it's false, because he's also undermined that source.
I see John over here struggling to restrain his contrarian instincts.
No,
he wants to say, no, it's all getting better.
Something contrarian. But I think that you have to look at this in two ways. One of which is he's getting worse, the lying's getting worse, and Reverend Sharpton is correct that we're across the bridge into something new, which is to say, are Democrats really going to want to field in 2020 somebody who is, you know, righteous and proper and won't go down the terrible road that Trump has gone down? No, what they're going to want is their own Trump. Right. They're going to want somebody who can go toe-to-toe with him properly and like not let him get away with it and let somebody lie for them. So that's the dangerous road we're going down. The other thing, though, is you have to understand about Republican support. It's not that they necessarily believe what he's saying, but they don't like you. Mm-hmm. And they don't like you, and they don't agree with you, and they're not going to give you the satisfaction of telling a pollster that they don't support Trump, because you're the enemy to them, not the press.
I feel personally attacked.
I'm sorry, I don't mean that. I just mean liberal Democrat. The polarization of the country is
they're not giving people. They don't like Philly.
They don't like Phil. They don't like Phil.
So, Phil, you know how they think about it.
So we all agree.
None of us are like. No one likes any of us.
By the way, but I'm saying what they don't like like is they don't like liberals, and they're not giving pollsters, they aren't going to give pollsters any grounds on which to say that Trump is unpopular with them.
Okay, so I got to cut you off just for one second because I want to get in the Wayback Machine here, because the reality is we all agree it's getting worse, right? But the truth is that there's an example of a Trump lie that goes back to the very beginning of the administration. In February of 2017, at Trump's first the joint session of Congress, when he gave a speech. I want to play the sound, and then we're going to talk about this particular lie and what's happened with it in the last day or so.
According to data provided by the Department of Justice, the vast majority of individuals convicted of terrorism and terrorism-related offenses since 9/11 came here from outside of our country.
Okay, so that's a very specific thing. He just claimed there was data from the Department of Justice that proved the thing he just said. Ben Wittes at Lawfare heard this at the time and said, that doesn't sound right to me, and started a process of doing the research. The research that they gathered seemed to indicate that it was false, so he started the FOIA application process. Went to the Justice Department and said, hey, you know what, I want to see this data that proves what the president said. And the Justice Department has now come back and said there are no responsive records that the Justice Department has, no data that supports what Trump said in that speech. So to me, there's something kind of special about that. Your first big speech as President of the United States, in the well of the House of Representatives, speaking in the biggest speech you're going to give as president to that point, to go out and not just tell a lie, a garden variety lie, but to cite the Department of Justice and say there are statistics that support something that happens to support one of the most controversial parts of your early administration, which is the travel ban. And now it turns out that it's totally made up, and that the Justice Department is willing to come out and say that it's totally made up. This, to me, strikes, I don't know, maybe I'm, again, a snowflake, but this strikes me as kind of extraordinary. No?
No, I think it is extraordinary, and I think the danger is it feeds into his anti-immigrant profiling of people from other places to say this and to act as though the Justice Department in some way has certified this. It feeds into this kind of xenophobia that he represents, which makes it dangerous. And before we discount that a lot of the Republicans that are listening to him are saying, well, I don't necessarily believe him, but I don't like you. I agree with John Podhoretz that they don't like us for different reasons. Yeah. But he's winning everyone he endorses in the primaries despite the lies, because he's hitting the xenophobia and the bigotry on things that a lot of them support. And that I don't think we want to come to terms with.
On the basis of your reporting and what you know about Donald Trump's psyche, what is it that makes him think he can get away with that lie? Like, well, everybody lies, right? Dr. House used to say that. We all lie. Everybody lies. Everyone at this table has lied at some point or another. But to be able to do that at the joint session and cite statistics that simply do not exist, what makes him think he can get away with that?
I mean, he's lied throughout his life, throughout his career, and not really faced consequences. And he also creates sort of an alternate reality in his mind, to the point where he thinks it's true. If he repeats it enough times, if he hears it reinforced from his advisors enough times, he starts to believe that that's the reality. And you see it on issue after issue after issue.
Can I be a snowflake?
Very, very quickly, because I got to go.
Okay. I was a speechwriter 30 years ago in the Reagan White House. If you had any idea how rigorously every single fact was checked.
Not in this White House.
Not in this White House. The opposite.
No.